Good afternoon to all. Thank you very much for being here with us today on this special occasion. It's 3 p.m. now, so I will start this event, and some more people might join as we go along. With this event, we launch Artists in Conversation, a series of online webinars, lecture performances, and live streaming events that constitute the online component for our exhibition, A Life Beyond Boundaries, the Geography of Belonging, ongoing at JWD Art Space in Bangkok through September 30th. My name is Loredana Pazzini. I'm the curator for the exhibition, and today I will also be your moderator. First of all, please allow me to express my sincere appreciation to today's management and team for making this project possible, both the actual exhibition in the exhibition space and also this online program, despite the many challenges that we are all facing now caused by the pandemic. We managed to open on June 1st, and we managed to stay opened for the month of June and July. The premises are now closed as we go through a very severe third wave. While we hope to reopen as soon as it is safe to do so, and on this note, please, everybody, those of you in Bangkok in particular, please stay home and stay safe. So while we hope to reopen in safe condition, we thought to bridge the physical distance that now separates us with this online program, Artists in Conversation, which aims to bring our speakers, artists, curators, and scholars closer to you to discuss some of the concerns that are at the core of the exhibition, such as how to define or to think about national imagining, national identity, and belonging. Topics that at present are further challenged by the pandemic-induced policy of national borders. In particular, this first talk, which is titled A Life Beyond Boundaries, from the book to the exhibition, I was with wonderful speakers, which I will now welcome. Southeast Asianist, scholar, and Professor Ajahn Chanbit Kasetsiri, artist Bodhi Vijaja, Mark Salvatus, and Roberto Roldan. Mary, if you can stop having the poster. In terms of the format for today's event, I will start the series of presentation by introducing the exhibition in relation to the legacy and inspiration of Benedict Anderson's book, A Life Beyond Boundaries. I'm pleased to say also today that this online platform is also a way for us to launch our catalog for the show, which is actually going to print as we speak. So as part of my presentation, I'll discuss some of the works in the exhibition from the pages of the book, as it were, to give you a sense of the publication. After my introductory presentation, each speaker will present for about 10 or 15 minutes, sharing insights on their works and practices also in relation to Anderson as a person and as a scholar. At the beginning of each speaker's talk, I will introduce them by providing also their bios. Of course, we will be very happy to take your questions once all the presentations have been concluded. So if you could please write your question in the chat box, or perhaps notify us that you would like to intervene. We really hope that this will be an engaging and dynamic conversation for us all. And before I start my presentation, some housekeeping rules. This talk is recorded so that you will be able to access it at a later stage if you wish to do so, and it is also live streamed on Facebook. Please remember to keep your mic on silent to minimize digital noise, especially at the time when the speakers are presenting. And lastly, Mary, which is our JWD host for today, is available to assist you if you are experiencing any technical glitch. You can chat on the chat box with her. And I believe she has already shared a message on this topic. So without further ado, let me start on my introductory presentation. And as a way to familiarize you all with the exhibition, especially those who have not been able to visit us at JWD, I will share a 50 seconds video tool. Mary, could you please share the video now? Thank you, Mary. I will share my video now, my screen. As the title implies, the exhibition A Life Beyond Boundaries, the Geography of Belonging is inspired by leading Southeast Asianist Benedict Anderson's book, A Life Beyond Boundaries, a book that was published first in Japanese and subsequently released in English and translated in many other languages, including many Southeast Asian languages. This was also Anderson's last book before his passing in 2015. There are many aspects of the book that interested me and in a way persuaded me to actually depart from it to formulate my curatorial framework for the show. And not the least the fact that this is an autobiographical book. And we will hear a lot more about the gestational project of the book from Ajahn Chandit. As an autobiographical book, Anderson wasn't particularly keen in writing it because it was about him as the individual, a subject that he thought would have not been of particular interest to the readers. And on the contrary, to me, the fact that this book is based on his life makes it all the more interesting because of its human and real, down-to-earth component, which may resonate with many of us. Reading the book, it actually becomes quite apparent how his reflection on national identity departed from his cosmopolitan and comparative outlook of life. And in this very book, he discusses how he came to theorize the nation as an imagined community, providing for me, and I believe for many readers, very fertile background information to approach and to further understand his more famous books, of course, including Imagined Community, where he expounds on cultural conceptions such as language, memory, and otherness as the ways to foreground the very production of national imagining. So departing from these reflections, the group exhibition, Life Beyond Boundaries, the Geography of Belonging, emerges as a way to discuss through visual art national belonging in the context of Southeast Asia. Embracing a comparative approach to the region, the exhibition invites 14 artists to consider the conception of identity and belonging from the artist's subjectivities, premised in their personal observations on the meaning of nationality as an individual or as a community. In the year-long preparation for the exhibition, the artist and I engaged in ongoing conversations, which revolved basically around this, I can call them research questions, really. Through this conversation, it became quite clear to me the way in which the works and the artists would question or negotiate their own national identity by incorporating, dismantling, or rejecting its symbols and connotations. For this reason, the exhibition features existing and newly commissioned works by artists of different generations. Some works stem from familiar icons or materials, such as traditional textiles, symbols, and techniques, while other works draw inspiration from personal or communal concerns of national belonging. As I mentioned, today we also launched the catalog for the exhibition, and here you see the cover and the first page with the content and my essay. So in the next few slides, I thought it would be interesting to take you through some of the different ways the artists related or responded to these research questions from the pages of the catalog, as the same conversation is carried through both platforms, in writing in the catalog as well as in local at JWD. For artists, Citra Sasmita, for instance, the question emerges of how cultural identity may not necessarily be associated with national belonging. Balinese by birth, her works highlight the points of contact and divergence of Hindu and Muslim cultures, and how being Balinese provides a fertile ground in evaluating how religion may be incorporated in one's own understanding of nationhood. In the ongoing Timur Merah project, and at JWG we show Timur Merah Project 6, the artist adopts the traditional Kamasan painting technique, typical of Bali and historically executed by men, to create large installations and works that reframe the patriarchal Balinese culture by adding ubiquitous female figures representing life and nature. Third generation Chinese immigrant to Myanmar artist So Yu Niu, in her practice, addresses her own condition of marginality and the challenges to conform to preconceived cultural categories or national imagining. In her work, she takes inspiration from ethnic Chinese and local Burmese cultural beliefs such as animism and folklores, along with Buddhist mythologies, as a way to reflect, similarly to Sasmita, whose work we just saw, on the restrictive patriarchal Burmese society. In her drawings and ceramic works, in particular you see the ceramic work here, she deconstructs the image of the self into various symbols. For instance, her recurrent representation of the snake or naga in Buddhist mythology to reference a sense of repression and alienation from the nation. Here, these are her drawings, which she actually produced specifically in response to the military repression in Myanmar, which started on February 1st, 2021 and is ongoing. Grounded on cultural and social issues, Wansani Siri Patanantakul's work Line is featured in the exhibition as a thin line of gold, suspended and away in the gallery space to emphasize its precarity. With this work, the artist underlined class disparity in Thai society and the struggles to identify with the nation which has historically been associated with the ruling power and elite. To do so, the work departs from her own experience in dealing with pawn shops to trade in her family belongings. Like the artist, many Thais are lining up to sell their gold, but also other domestic items such as kitchen utensils and so on, to bring in some cash. The situation is, of course, exasperated now by the COVID-19 emergency and the lack of support from the government. Similarly, artist Padompom Tespratip focuses on subnational religious conflict in Thailand's deep south to bring to the fore the importance of cultural reflexivity and cultural heritage in terms of one's own identity in the face of national struggle. For instance, in the video work Plank Krom Dek or Lullaby, which you see the installation image on this page, he collaborated with the conservator of Cheche dialect to rewrite the lyrics of the social ancient lullaby, which implicitly disguises ideological hypnotism. In relation to the role of traditions as a way to reconfigure national identity, UK-based Malaysian artist Afandi Anwar uses in this series of work, Site 1, Site 2, and Site 3, traditional clothing like the complicate and other textiles that are associated with Malaysian and broader Southeast Asian cultures as a way to dismantle and reconstruct new meanings of belonging in relation to the evolving urban landscapes of Southeast Asia. And my screen seems to be stuck at this moment. Okay, shifting on new ground, literally actually, Vietnamese artist Han In Phan forgoes the question of national belonging altogether, instead developing in his practice the representation of an imaginary land, my land. This ongoing body of work contains drawings, sculptures, and writings that represent maps, artifacts, and tales of an imagined territory. This territory does not correspond to any known culture in human history. It has its own systems of logics, language, and methodology that are functional only within themselves, a place where the artist has absolute authority. For Lao artist Jean-Paul Potizan, the perception of identity, on the other hand, is clearly a very much nation-specific affair, overlapping with the memory of a war still too current to be forgotten. The Life of the Land is the title of this work, which was created to reflect humans' tenacity in the face of conflict. And this work, in fact, the artist meaningfully repurposes a bombshell, an actual bombshell dropped on the Laos territory, into a large pot for plants, in a way to generate new life and hope from the destruction of war. (03958.DC) by artist Li Huangli. In the video Perpetual Ephemeral, of which you see some still images and the installation shot, the artist performs the domestic routine of cutting and simmering beef bones to prepare pho, the Vietnamese national dish. The silk scroll, which you see on the left next to the video screen, the lyrics, the silk scroll features the lyrics, a poem in Vietnamese and in English of the song played in the video, an old poetic melody on the meaning of life. These, the photograph ashes and sculptures by the same artist represent the same bones she used for the making of the pho, which were afterward casted in bronze. The sculptures and photographs obtained from this process become hybrid crystallized objects of memory. Haute Lina's mixed media installation, Salah Samnak, evaluates nationhood through memories of local traditions to discuss community belonging in relation and in opposition to state narratives. Salah Samnak, or rest house, is an old style house in throughout Cambodia and some other Southeast Asian countries. In the installation, Wood adopts the outline of Salah Samnak, creating a geometrical form that resembles a shelter or a hut, a portable home, perhaps. The outline, however, is not made of solid matter, but light in the form of blue neon tubes that, attached together, constitute the skeleton of this otherwise very sturdy architectural structure. And memory and history are two fundamental references in the video work by Irawan Hamed and Tita Salina, When You Arrive, You'll Regret, in which they reflect on nationalism through labor migration and border crossing issues in Indonesia. In the video, the artists focus on the disputed island of Batam, which is part of the free trade zones between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, and depending on Indonesian manpower, as a way to challenge the notion of nationhood. In this short mentions of some of the works and conversations, and I have not mentioned the works by the three artists that are presenting today with us, what clearly surfaced at the time of developing this project was that one way to productively discuss national belonging in the context of Southeast Asia was for me to consider the conceptions of identity and belonging beyond straightforward geographical perspectives, in turn placing the question of who is the nation in the hands of the people. This last slide features the mixed media works La Metamorphose, which was part of Ajahn Montian Buma first solo show in Thailand, Stories from the Farm, in 1989. This work and the whole series in Stories from the Farm break the ground on concept of national representation. Here, the artist seems to place the question of who is the nation in the hands, literally, of the farmers. Their voices, their lives, their tools might give us an answer. Thank you very much for your attention. And at this point, I indeed would like to invite the speakers to join us. So, and also to share their insights on and connection and responses to Anderson theories on nationhood. And also in relation to Anderson as a scholar and as a friend. So on this note, I would like to invite first Ajahn Chambit Kasetsiri to speak. Let me introduce him with his bio first. Chambit Kasetsiri is a Thai professor emeritus of Thammasat University, a prominent historian and Thai studies scholar. He served as lecturer of history at Thammasat from 1973 to 2001 and founded in 2000 the Southeast Asian program. He was the president of Thammasat University in 1995-1996. He has written approximately 200 articles and a number of publications on Thai and Southeast Asian history. Those in English can be found in his studies in Thai and Southeast Asian history, 2015. He has also launched a Siam, not Thailand campaign to rename the country as to reflect the reality about its ethnic, languages, and cultural identities. His latest works deal with question of war and peace and good ASEAN-neighbor relations, especially between Thailand and Cambodia. He is co-author, along with Pavin Chachavalpongpun, Kyoto, and Pu Sotira Krumpen, Pre Vihar, A Guide to Thai-Cambodian Conflict and Its Solution, 2013. Chambit has been awarded with the Fukuoka Academy Prize 2012 and the DCAS 2014 Distinguished Contribution to Southeast Asian Studies by the Association of Asian Studies in the US. Professor Chambit was also a very close friend of Benedict Anderson, and in fact, in their academic and personal friendship is mentioned in the book Life Beyond Boundaries. Ajahn Chambit, please join us.
Sawadee krap. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to see a lot of people here, and besides talking about Ben Anderson, I was assigned by Loredina to talk for 10 minutes about the book. The book which I have the Japanese version with here with me. The question was that why it was in Japanese and it was not supposed to be in English. My guess is that, you know, Ajahn Ben did not want to write it in English. He probably too kind of feeling or kind of what you call anade, you know, เกรงใจ or uh, feeling that he's not supposed to talk about himself. That's the kind of thing that I gather. But because of his very good friend in Kyoto, Professor Kato, uh, Tsuyoshi Kato, and a Japanese lady, the two of them convinced him that he should write it. Yeah, so people would understand what kind of thing that he's been doing for all his life. That's why the book came out in Japanese, you know. And of course, I don't read Japanese, you know, but I heard a lot from listening to from Ben and listening from people who've been working with him that the book finally came out and tell you a lot about himself, his life, and his work. In the Thai language, you know, we have two words, silapa, meaning arts, and then sat or shastra, meaning sign. My idea is that Ben Anderson combined the two into his life, into his work, so he can cross between arts and science and then express it so well. And in many ways, you know, I feel that by reading his book in the English, of course, and when it's translated into Thai, I found out that a lot of things that I didn't know. I didn't know that, you know, as we know that Ben Anderson was born in 1936. He was born in Kunming in southern China. And this photo is Ben Anderson with his what you call a nanny, you know, a governess who is a Vietnamese. So in some funny way, you know, I don't know whether Ben's first language could be either Vietnamese, learning from his nanny, or could be French. I don't know. I cannot uh, make my decision, yeah, whether his first word would be in Vietnamese or in French. But the lady, you can see, you know, she's in a Vietnamese costume, and she's a Catholic. She speaks French, so she speaks French to Ben's mother. Ben's mother speak French. This family, they speak French. They speak many languages. So in the next photo, yeah, next one, this one, yeah, Ben was sitting there, and then the mother and his brother, Perry Anderson, yeah, the one of the editor of the New Left review in London. I'm not sure whether this one was taken in probably it might be in California. As you know, from reading his book, that the family left China before Pearl Harbor. They went all the way to Japan, and then they got stuck in California. And they stay in California, in Colorado, and finally, towards the end of the war, they went back to Waterford, Ireland. So that's you can see that from his childhood, he has crossed the boundary, yeah, from China to Japan to California, and then by ship back to Waterford. So this is the background that if you want to understand Ben's thinking, you want to understand his imagined communities, you want to understand a lot of things. I think his background is quite important. One other thing that I remember that Ben loved to use a lot of time is the word specter in comparison. You know, he has gone into a kind of comparative study way back, you know, from his childhood until his education at Eton, Cambridge, and then finally at Cornell. So in a very interesting way, you know, he is very fit to write the book Imagine Community, and very well portrayed in his autobiography. One of another question that Loridina posted to me is that what about Ben Anderson's life in Southeast Asia? I think by the year towards the end of the 1990s, you know, he decided to move around and station half of the year in Ithaca, New York, upstate New York, you know, half a year. When the winter was coming, he would fly over to California, stop over in Japan, and then the Philippines, and then to his apartment in Bangkok. He bought an apartment in Bangkok. That's how he led his life uh, when he's rather advanced in his age. So in some interesting way, you know, he keep in touch with Southeast Asia, mainly Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia. And as you know that he was banned from Indonesia for 26 years. Finally, he got back. He was very happy to get back to Java. And if you see, you see this picture, Ben, in his advanced age, his blonde hair has become white, still wearing sarong. I was kind of surprised and amazed, why, this man, always wear sarong. And the feeling that I get is that wearing it give him freedom, and this kind of freedom, beyond the boundary, can kind of move him around, and he's quite happy with it. Next one, please. Next one. This is a very interesting one. Ben Anderson, because of his study in classic, he probably quite impressed with the version of hell, 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 in Thailand. This photo taken in somewhere not very far from where I am sitting now, taking in the province of Ang Thong. Is a version of hell according to a Thai Buddhism, and by visiting many places, with all this hell, as you know, Ben Anderson came up with this book printed in India. He printed this book in India. He studied what kind of hell that we have in Southeast Asia, especially in Thailand. So, well, what should I say? He has a very interesting life, and by the end of it, he has a beautiful pass away. You know, he went back to Java. He went back to Java, and he he went away from there. So this is the kind of life that quite most interesting to a lot of people like us, you know. And I would say, you know, that I'm very happy to get to know him and to learn a lot of things from him. And I am sure that a lot of people have the same feeling like me. So when Loredina came up with this exhibition and I went to see it, I would say that I am very impressed by the exhibition. I don't know how much time I spend, you know, I think I spent about 1 hour or two with Loredina, and I get very exhausted, you know, because all the exhibition, you know, starting from uh, the the chain which represent the maps, you know, that it the country is like that kind of chain that can expand and shrink, and you know it can change, you know, and then the expression on the flag, you know, by this gentleman from Singapore, and then, well, of course, you know, I talked to him already that he has a Javanese name, you know, and then, but he's now living in Singapore. And then I went through all the uh, the exhibition, you know, very impressed, very impressed. You know, the one on the Philippines, the one on Cambodia, you know, the kind of word that it was picked up to show the sala, you know, the pavilion. I went to all of it, you know. The one on Burma is impressive, and the one I like a lot, you know, is the two-person from Indonesia trying to go from Batam to Singapore. You know, I think the two Indonesian were the only two that met Ben Anderson in person. But I guess all of you did not meet him. But I'm quite sure that Ben Anderson would be very happy because you know about the man, you know about Ben Anderson. You may get some idea from him, and you go on your own. You do the interpretation, you do the presentation, you do whatever you feel like doing it. So I am very happy to talk here, and I hope that a lot more people can see the exhibition. I think, you know, after Bangkok, Miss Loredina should move her exhibition around. First, go to Chiang Mai. Congratulations. I think my time is up now.
It's okay. You can take as much as you like, but if you feel that you've come to your conclusion for now, there will be more time later to have more conversation, Ajahn Chambit.
Yeah, I think I would want to listen to the artist, you know, what they will say. Yeah, because they have done impressive works.
And on this picture, which is a very fun pictures of you and Benedict Anderson together.
Yeah, we try to get people to go to see hell around here. If you come, I'll take you.
I will. Thank you, Ajahn Tanvi. And thank you so much for sharing your insights, anecdotes on the book, things that we wouldn't know because you were so close to him. The way you say his legacy has inspired many people, and we all go on our own. I've attempted this project, but we all developed from his incredible theories and insights. And also his cosmopolitan and comparative upbringing that it seems to have predated his interest in comparative studies. You mentioned that he was clearly very close to all Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia. Perhaps it was his first place and his last place in Southeast Asia. So on this note, I think it would be interesting to introduce our next speaker, which also you mentioned, Bodhi Wijaja, who is precisely from Indonesia and within upbringing in Singapore. I will introduce Bodhi with your bio. Bodhi articulates subtle reflections on migration, memory, special relations, and cross-cultural hybridities, driven by first-hand experiences of migration and diaspora. This is expressed through a broad range of media, from drawing and new media to architectural installation and live art, with an emphasis on process and bodily engagement. Wijaja was the recipient of the Singapore Art Museum and Kwa Goma co-commission for his project Black Hat, shown at the 9th Asia Pacific Triennial in Brisbane, Australia in 2018, and the 6th Singapore Biennial in 2019. Recent solo exhibitions include Declaration of 2019 at Hellweiser Gallery, New York City, Rivers and Takes Tena Dan Air 2018, Shanghai, Singapore, Black Hat Singapore Biennale Affiliate Projects, ICA Singapore 2016. His works have been included in international group exhibitions such as MAP1, Waterways 2017, Diaspora Pavilion 57th Venice Biennale, Jerusalem Biennale in 2017, Incheon Biennale 2016, From East to the Barbican 2015 at the Barbican London, Infinity in Flux 2015, Art Jog Indonesia, and Numérique number 7 2012 in Hagen-les-Bains, France, amongst others. Please, Bodhi, join us.
Thank you, Loredana, and thank you so much, Professor Chanvit, for such a vivid sharing of your friendship with Ben Anderson. I would like to start by saying that national identity in the course of my artistic practice is a very subjective one, or rather my exploration into this notion of what it means to belong to a nation comes from a very personal point of departure. And one of the things that I explore in my artistic practice is the idea of writing. I recall vividly how my mother would always share with me of my childhood complaints of having to practice writing, and how I would cry nonstop, complaining that my arm was about to fall off from the hours of practicing writing. And I think that really drums the point of how the handwriting as a gesture, as a mark being made by the hand, how it encapsulates or how it embeds within itself the narratives, histories, cultures of an individual, and how I find it to be as meaningful as the semantic content of the words and so forth. I am particularly drawn for that reason to Benedict Anderson's idea of how the written text or the printed text, to be specific, how it had promoted the earlier consciousness of the nation, in how the printed text helped to stabilize language through mechanical means, in how books had survived through centuries without looking different, in preserving the language across a long period of time, and also in how the printed text was able to, I think, combine or flatten these more numerous numbers of local dialects into a single vernacular language. My own experience with languages, I would say, has a direct kind of a contrast with Anderson's idea of nation and of the printed text, in the sense that my experience of languages or my experience with multiple languages marked the beginning of my identity as a foreigner in Singapore. I had arrived in Singapore at a very young age, when I was only 9 years old. And at the time, I was only able to speak Bahasa Indonesia. And in Singapore, I learned both English and Chinese. And I think that experience of not having a kind of a linguistic center had enabled a kind of a constant translations, or a kind of a constant relay of meanings across these several languages that I speak today. And as these meanings relate from one linguistic field to another, there is a kind of a process of encoding as the meanings change and as these languages interrelate. Which is why since 2019, I had been particularly interested in exploring into the Morse code. Firstly, the Morse code is a kind of a language, if you like, that would allow parties to communicate across very long distances. And distance is definitely something that I look into very closely in my art practice. And also how Morse code as a system, as a coding system, seems to occupy a kind of a liminal space. It is transmitted in between two local languages of sort. It has to be decoded into a kind of a local vernacular. And finally, of its relation with the Cold War history and military history, particularly the World War II. Which leads me to the Bandung Conference. The Cold War history is something that I look a lot within my practice. And the Bandung Conference, of course, had taken place somewhat at the height of this bipolar geopolitical situation in the world at the time between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. And I think to me, I conceived the Bandung Conference more than just an event, but rather it represented a kind of active third space, a political third space, or a kind of a boundary of sort between the East and the West, and how these leaders of various nations from Africa and Asia had come together to try to work out their agency within this boundary between the East and the West without having to choose any side. I also explore into the political figure of President Sukarno, the founding president of Indonesia. His presence is a recurring motif in my art practice. And President Sukarno gave an opening speech at Bandung Conference. And I was quite drawn to a particular quote that he used, which had come from a verse from a poem, Paul Revere's Ride, by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, in the sense of how that, to me, represented a kind of a liminal moment, an international hybrid moment where a president of Indonesia was quoting a poem written by an American poet with leaders from the Eastern Bloc being part of the congregation. And the verse that I chose, that I took an abridged version of, was a cry, a voice, and a word that shall echo forevermore. And this verse became the motif, or became the material for the two works that I am presenting at the show. Sorry, I think I had forgotten to turn on the sound, but I'll play the video nevertheless. This is a video that was created using an algorithmic sequence. There is a program that generates the combination of sounds and images. And I'm sorry, are you able to hear the sound? Oh, okay, sorry, yeah, so you're able to hear this, that's good. The sounds are of that, of reversed gamelan, meaning that the gamelan sounds had been played backwards rather than how it is usually played. And the images had come from archival images of the Bandung Conference. I had wanted to, I guess, look for something in common across the different national agendas that were present in this conference. And I felt that there was actually a joint performance by these delegates that came from different countries, in how each of them was, in a sense, looking forward towards the future, looking and searching for something in the future. And I tried to then use the gaze of the camera to capture this joint performance of the different delegates in the conference. The second work that I am presenting in the show had to do with the presence of national flags. And I started becoming interested in flags when I was thinking about the maritime flags, and how flags could be seen from across vast distances, and how the combination of these flags enabled a kind of a linguistic communication between the parties involved. And of course, in thinking about flags as a written expression or a language, I couldn't help but think about the national flag and ponder about what exactly was written in a national flag, what kind of declarations and dreams are being encoded in them. Hence, I decided to encode the verse from President Sukarno's opening speech into a series of 10 flags, with each flag encoding one word from that verse. How I started the process was to first analyze the colors that are present in the 120 national flags of the non-aligned movement, of which the Bandung Conference was a kind of precursor. And what I found out to be interesting was how the different flags seems to overlap a lot in their use of colors. But also at the same time, there were nuances within each color family, a kind of diversity, a kind of micro diversity, if you like, very much like how local dialects are present within a kind of area or within the family of languages. And the encoding of the flags used what I term as color Morse code. It is a system that I derived of first corresponding the dot with colors of the short wavelengths within the visible color spectrum, and the dash with colors that belongs to the longer wavelength part of the spectrum. And to show you as an example, the first word for example, was encoded in two colors. So in Morse code, it is represented as a dot and dash. Hence, in the color Morse code, it is represented as a green and red. Oops. And this is the second word. In the second flag, it is read from top down. And so this is how the encoding works. So each flag is a piece of text that can be read using this key. And there's this kind of a pixelated pattern across each of the flags. And they are actually encodings of the 10-point communique that were issued jointly by the nations who participated in the Bandung Conference. Another expression of a joint kind of language, a hybrid kind of a statement that went beyond the boundaries of each of these nations who were taking part in the conference. Hence, if flags can truly speak, I imagine these flag works as a kind of echo of a message that came from the past. And this is a message of peace and one of global solidarity, especially in the global uncertain times that we are living in today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bodhi. It's always fascinating to hear you speaking about the works. I never give justice when I speak about your works, because it's honestly very complex, as you know, and it's very engaging conceptually, but it's also visually very attractive. And these two works that Bodhi mentioned, the flags and the video, are placed in the entrance as the visitors enter the exhibition space. These are the two works that they encountered together with Wikis Link, which is, as Ajahn Chanbit mentioned, a loose sort of reference to cartography or a map, a fluid map as such. So on this note, in terms of the power of language, both the words as well as structures of knowledge as cartography is, I would like to introduce our next speaker and artist, Mark Salvatus. Mark is an intermediate artist from the Philippines at the forefront of critical discourse on the subject of urbanization and socioeconomics underpinnings that are made manifest in densely populated areas. The urban landscape serves as both repository and stage for Salvatus' works that deal with familiar objects, chance encounters, and everyday politics. Since 2006, he has produced his artistic project, Salvage Projects, and developed his work across various disciplines and media. He is also one of the founders in Load Nadito Projects in 2016, an artistic and research initiative that explores various modes of producing and presenting contemporary art by organizing and co-organizing a wide range of programs. His works have been presented in different exhibitions and venues, including Kyoto Art Center 2020, Sharjah Biennale in 2019, Guangzhou Biennale in 2018, MMCA Seoul 2018, Ozarj Art Foundation in Hong Kong in 2018, Mori Art Museum in Tokyo 2017, Rencontre Internationale Paris-Berlin 2016-17, Venice Architecture Biennale 2016, Sonsbeek International in Netherlands in 2016, Survival Kit Festival in Sweden in 2014, and many others. So please, Mark, join us with your speech today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Loredana. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm very honored to be part of this show, and thank you also for organizing the show, of course, JWD. And yeah, very excited. I'm too bad we cannot visit the show. So I'm going to present my slide. Okay. Yeah, so okay. So this is a photograph I took years ago of a view from our house window in my hometown, Lucban. 4 hours drive to the south from the capital, Manila. It's called Mount Banahaw, known for its mystical and enigmatic energies. I will do my presentation as a journey, and this is a place where I started. My hometown, Lucban, is a small town, and the most common source of income is farming, cooking, and anything related to food. Growing up, I'm exposed to the harvest tradition of pahiyas. Pahiyas, literally called decor, to decorate a Thanksgiving of bountiful harvest every summer. From vegetables, fruits, local foods, and crafts, houses are adorned with colorful and locally sourced materials to celebrate for one day. Originally a pagan tradition of offering to gods and goddesses and to nature, it was converted into Christian celebration by the Spanish colonizers by offering the harvest to a saint called San Isidro Labrador, patron saint of farmers. The festival was a big influence for me as a young child, participating in the yearly festivity that the whole community is involved. Since my hometown don't have any museum or galleries when I was growing up, this is my first exposure to art, I should say. Objects put together, temporarily connected, lived experiences, local materials and context, participatory, and so on. I practiced along the way when I went to Manila to study advertising. I call my overall artistic practice as salvage projects, basing with the word salvage or save, or made safe, exploring the complexities of this word to connect in relation to movement, whether it's physical movement or movement of ideas, rural to urban to elsewhere, survival, threat, debris, whether it's trash or fragments of history, humor and play, and I try to build layers of visual languages and tendencies. And by making a work, I strive to understand and misunderstand the world where I am situated. Moving away from the mountain to the urban, I desired for the future. I started to become a street artist in Manila, one of the most densely populated cities in the world. As a vast and immense city, almost everyone is finding and trying to make their own space or to mark their own territory. The city is the future for me as a young artist, coming from the countryside, with curiosity in hand. But what is really the future? I call myself Boy Agimat, a triangular eye that sees the city in many different ways, trying to be visible and invisible at the same time, receiving the inspiration and frustration of the capital in my own eyes. In the Philippine folklore, agimat or amulets are used as personal protection from bad spirits, a charm for good luck, and was used in several local rebellions against the colonizer Spain and other armed struggles in the 60s and 70s. A medallion or a piece of cloth, an object of belief, belief as an act of survival. Void sky, lost war. Booze, steal, find man. Ask mom, no porn. The divide is obvious with destruction and construction of what is a better place to live. The city is originally came about as a project of the future. People move from the countryside into the city to escape and look for a better future, marking as a form of existence individually and collectively, even if it's anonymous. Collecting poetry of unknown tags in the streets that wants to be heard or seen, talking walls, echoing surface, a collective haiku, building an idea of play that everyone is part of the game, understanding a sense of I am here, or we are here, that is always misunderstood, a ghost writer. I found myself working in communities, neighborhood, and cities. Traces were collected from random passersby, objects that are attached on their bodies, inside their pockets, inside their bags, on that particular moment, and wrapping it on the wall as a collective imprint on a communal wall. As cavemen told their stories thousands of years ago, wrap is revealing our contemporary way of life through traces of objects, wrapping as marker, wrapping as preserving, but at the same time temporary as pencil drawings on the wall. Tracing and wrapping went to different places as migrant, a transient, temporary, but leaving an imprint that will also be gone. It is like mapping, a human act of existence, belongings as traces, belongings of where to belong. Where do we belong? Erasing as a form of revealing, marking as a form of deletion, collecting and repeating as negotiation. Maps as the geographical representation of the land, a tool to navigate directions and also to mark borders and lines. We can hold the landscape in our hands, folding, marking as drawings. Codes are made, an imprint by man on the land. It looks like being erased, wiped out, blackened out, camouflage. But it also reveals something, many things. Man's desire to exploit the land. The landscape are flat, viewing patterns of everyday navigation, a repetitive gesture. Sorry, wait a minute, it's hanging. maybe I'll just continue reading. An accessory of power, dominance, and survival. Used army uniforms and clothes with camouflage patterns were collected from different thrift shops and secondhand shops in Manila, called ukay-ukay. When translated into English is dig-dig. Repeating the word dig to excavate, the act of digging is synonymous to land, extraction. Most of clothes from ukay-ukay come from countries like Canada, US, Korea, or Hong Kong, as donation or as an excess to be exported to developing countries like Philippines. The distribution of these excess clothes become very common in almost every cities and towns. The camouflage pattern hides the threat from beneath the surface of using its dazzle to confound the viewer into submission, as decoy to think of something else, likened to animals to survive and to attack in an arena of game of life. It is contesting for ownership of space, for a piece of property, or to monopolize resources. The camouflage pattern is to blend to the surrounding to disguise the agenda of the land. From jungle, desert, snow, and urban combat, the pattern in an evolving pattern. Depending on the environment, the nation, and its uses, the materiality of the clothes and uniforms also talks about the body and its connection to the land, the socio-political situation, economy, fashion, altering its uses that the military is concerned about. Okay. Mary, can you help me stop sharing?
Sure.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry. So part of moving is migration, and moving is also about coming back or revisit. Being still is not an option. I bought my uncle's laptop in a secondhand, not knowing that there were several photographs and video clips saved from his files. He works as a seaman for almost 25 years, and his last voyage was in 2012, returning home to the Philippines to retire. I asked my uncle if I can have it, and he said yes. I selected some of the photos and blurring his personal details, still and static. The photos are somewhat an abstract narrative of his voyage from the Philippines and beyond. Not only about a personal voyage or travel, but different layers were revealed through his photographs. Labor, migration, economy, capital, family, the sea, the land, distribution, and circulation. An estimated 460,000 Filipino seafarers are employed worldwide. More than any other nationality, 1 out of every 5 seafarer in the world is Filipino. Archives as we accumulate experiences, objects that are altered meanings, or a long span of echo that still linger us. An open inquiry to what it will bring us, like poetry. Giving us energies like spirits, movement and traveling is a major component of my practice, but I found something back in my house which my father had collected. Images also migrate. How we view, how it is presented. Photographs as a record imprint of time. It can be fact or fiction. What do you want to see? To frame or to reframe? In 1975, Italian Hollywood super actress and starting to be a professional photographer, Gina Lollobrigida was commissioned by the First Lady Imelda Marcos to do coffee table books. The Philippines, 1976, and Manila, 1976 also. A copy of those 2 books were found in my father's collection, dusting in our home library. The books were published when the country was under martial law, which was declared in 1972 by the dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Financed by the Philippine National Bank, Gina Lollobrigida's Trip and Book Project was a propaganda book on promoting tourism and obscuring what's really happening in the country under the new society period, a fantasy and nightmare at the same time. Published in Liechtenstein, the book was limited in copies, with cliché tourist-descripted subjects such as beaches, farms, smiling people, naked children, and ethnic groups, especially the Tasadais. It presented stereotyped images of a foreign eye to visualize the country amidst the reality of martial law. The book was intended for European market. Presenting collages of original pages of the book side by found clippings of Gina Lollobrigida's film stills, also from my father's collection, a small-time collector of the 70s and 80s. The collages tries to complicate the idea of fiction, storytelling, image making, and fantasies. One can make his or her own interpretation of the past through complicated narratives. Another project from an object of the past, the reading to be present, and to this case, we re-listen to reimagine. I found a vinyl record from my father's collection, a copy of the Philippine Constabulary Band pressed in the 70s, a marching band formed in 1901 during the American colonization, founded and headed by African-American Lieutenant Walter Loving of the U.S. Army's 48th Volunteer Infantry. At the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, the United States featured a human zoo of people from their newly acquired territories, the Philippines, including the Philippines, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. The Philippine exhibition involved over 1,000 Filipinos from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, who were instructed to dance, sing, and perform rituals, a place they have no connection at all, a forced migration for the purpose of exhibition. The Philippine Constabulary Band participated in this live exhibition, where its performance of Giovanni Rossini's William Tell Overture caught the attention of the composer John Philip Sousa. The band would go on to perform at US President William Taft's inauguration and the Japanese Emperor Meiji. More than 100 years after the performance in St. Louis, the music still lingers. I asked the current military band to play the overture, this time complicating the tune of the contemporary empire side by side with the vinyl collection of my father. What this past have to do with the here and now, the later and elsewhere? The music is the migrant is the music. The Philippine Army Band, who performed in 1904 in the US, is I consider the first musicians or entertainers who was sent abroad to entertain, to play cover songs, Western music, and popular songs. And today, in every hotels, bars, from Seoul to Dubai, and in cruise ships, you can see Filipino bands or singers covering popular music for the global demand to entertain. Music, political interest, and the migratory workforce converge to sketch a complex history of labor and influence. The territory is the music, as the music is the self. The same as whistling. Whistling marks an imaginary mark that I am here. Making a mark or territory is not anymore physical, but also virtual and digital. It is about landscape, digital technology, and body. Human Condition was inspired by René Magritte's La Condition Humaine, or The Human Condition, and a local revolt against the Spanish colonizers led by Hermano Pule in my hometown, Lucban. He was the Filipino religious leader who founded and led the Cofradia de San Jose. The Cofradia was established in 1832 in response to the racially discriminatory practices of the Catholic Church in the Philippines. During the Spanish colonial period, Catholic religious orders refused to admit native Filipinos as members. In retaliation, Pule established his own religious order, which was exclusive for native Filipinos. They also incorporated elements of pre-colonial pagan beliefs, such as the use of agimat, anting-anting, or amulet. Hermano Pule was captured and executed by firing squad by the Spaniards. The authorities had his body quartered. His dismembered head, hands, and feet were exhibited throughout our hometown and nearby towns. Inspired by this local revolution, I looked into the uprisings, revolt since 1980, from my birth year up to now. I'm studying the connection of the body to the land through revolutions. I collected traces of bodies present on digital maps, partially blending the body to the surface of the land. The ghostly presence of bodies on digital maps mark an intricate relationship between the physical body, the landscape, intertwined with the digital landscape, and the supposed spirit of revolutions. It is also a way of tagging as graffiti artists, and now we tag ourselves in digital maps, an instant location and photograph tagging as base for making territories and imagined landscapes, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Cyberspace thus becomes a retroactive speculative sphere. The ghostly presence of bodies on digital maps marks an intricate relationship between the physical body, the landscape intertwined with the digital landscape, and the supposed spirit of revolutions. The trace, however, is ultimately evidence or witnesses. What's left behind are the land, the streets, the plazas, the parks, and the other open and public spaces as solid witnesses to these events, and the spirits that may still be walking around. But these new imagined images on other space can blend the relationship of the body to the ground, growing and also dying. I will end my slide with my contribution to the exhibition, weakest link. Keychains linked together, forming what appears to be map on the floor, which border lines kept changing as people would accidentally walk over it. Lines as drawings to build a connection, but it is also to divide. Security checks, border patrol, immigration police to make a boundary. A game we always play. We can also cross, change, alter these borders. What I'm interested is the organic notion of borders. It is when these borders are constantly deterritorialized by the peripheral communities and new imaginations and migrations, evoking the ingenuity and spontaneity of residents through various forms of human relations and community building. Maps are controlled. It is also imagined. It is always changing politically, socially, economically, culturally, and personally. Change makes us to be secured, but it's also portable. We carry it to places where we can belong. It is also about connections and disconnections of our imagination. Salamat po.
Thank you so much, Mark, for
Thank
your.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark, for your contribution. And I'm so, it's wonderful to see weakest links in all the previous permutation, in all the different locations outside, in a parking lot, in the Manila Biennale. So it really is about people closest to the community, as your other works are in relation really to the community and making marks. So in a way, it's very much connected with Bodhi's work in terms of language. Language not necessarily is in the form of letters, but as we see with Bodhi's shapes and colors, and in your work is marking left behind. And as a side note, I had no idea that Gina Lollobrigida was in a book that was commissioned by Marcos, and I find that quite interesting. Gina Lollobrigida is, of course, an Italian, very well-known actress of the 60s, and she was very well-known just after the Second World War in Italy, because she was part of the neo-realist cinema movement in Italy, which was actually very important. So I find it interesting that Marcos, as a tool for propaganda, would ask an actress such as her, which was really an actress for the people. Her works, her films see her fighting for the rights of the people to do such a book. And on this note, actually, the connection of artists and the community, I think it's very timely and very interesting to introduce our next and last, but of course not least, speaker for today, Norberto Roldan, who will share more insights on his beautiful works that we have in the exhibition, and on his wider practice, which is very much connected to the community, and also his relation with Benedict Anderson, as he had the opportunity to meet him. First, I'd like to introduce you, Norberto, with your bio. Norberto Roldan's practice is rooted in social and political issues. His installations, assemblages, and paintings of found objects, text fragments, and found images address issues surrounding everyday life, history, and collective memory. Rodin's artistic process engages with ways in which material objects are reappropriated in another context. He found Black artists in Asia in 1986, a group with a socially and politically progressive practice. In 1990, initiated Viva Hexacon, the Zion Island Visual Art Exhibitions and Conference, the longest running biennale in the Philippines, and also co-founded Green Papaya Art Projects in 2000, which remains to be the longest running independent and multidisciplinary platform in the Philippines. He is represented in several landmarks exhibitions, such as the Solomon Guggenheim Museum in New York City in 2013, the National Gallery Singapore 2015, the National Art Center Tokyo, Japan in 2017, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia in 2017, and many countries around the world. Welcome, Kiwi, and please join us.
Thank you for that, Loredana. I'll prepare my screen. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. When Loredana invited me to participate in an exhibition she was planning in November 2020, I immediately said yes. When I saw that her curatorial framework was based on Benedict Anderson's memoir, A Life Beyond Boundaries. I must honestly say, though, that my initial attraction to the framework was less scholarly and intellectual. Instead, it delivered an instant sentimental connection with Benedict, the rock star scholar of Southeast Asian history, whose book, Imagined Communities, is considered the most influential book on nationalism and nationhood. I consider myself very lucky to have personally met and hung out with him. In 2000, I co-founded the independent space Green Papaya Art Projects in Manila. Early on, this initiative nurtured a tight community of contemporary artists across disciplines. I remember a very rare circumstance. And Mark, it's happening to me. and my slides is hanging. Sorry.
Perhaps, Mary, would you help sharing the screen?
I think it has something to do with the screen sharing.
Or maybe the file is too heavy sometimes. Or you can go like this.
Okay, I'll just go like this. Can you view the slides?
Yes.
So I don't have to go slide showing, or just
Just,
click on the slides. Okay. So Benedict Anderson came to Manila in 2008 as the keynote speaker of the 5th annual Southeast Asian Cinema Conference. That's the poster. The event was held at the Ateneo de Manila University, a mere 20-minute ride from Papaya's location in Kamuning. Filmmakers who screened their films and hung out in Papaya thought of inviting him for an intimate talk with artists in our space. To our surprise, he accepted the invitation, but on 3 conditions. That he won't deliver a talk, but would love to have a casual conversation with the artists. Number 2, that he wears t-shirt and rubber slippers. And number 3, just to drink beer and have fun with the artists. So this is our poster. And the copy of the poster says, Benedict Anderson drinks, the not so unofficial reception. Of course, it turned out to be a historic night for our own small imagined communities. Having started on a sentimental note, I would like to share that I first explored the use of the indigenous textile called patadyong as a sentimental journey into discovering the history of my island and region, and how that discovery only highlighted the three evil doctrines the West invented. These are imperialism, capitalism, and feudalism. The patadyong is an indigenous Philippine wrap, a round skirt, worn by both men and women of the Visayas Islands. The patadyong is similar to the malong used in Mindanao, the Sulu archipelago, and other Southeast Asian countries. The patadyong is made in Panay Island, particularly in the province of Iloilo. When the Spaniards arrived in 1569, the weaving industry in Iloilo was already well established. By the 18th century, Iloilo had become the center of the textile industry in the Philippines and had brought economic prosperity to the province. But the textile industry started to decline after the arrival of the British businessman and diplomat Nicholas Loney in 1852. Attracted by the potential of the sugar industry in the neighboring island of Negros, Loney introduced modern sugar milling technology and importation of steam-powered mills. He also saw the commercial advantage of exporting sugar from the Visayan port of Iloilo, bypassing Manila direct to Europe. However, the historian Alfred McCoy, who specializes on colonization of Southeast Asia, argued in his analysis of the rise and fall of Iloilo as a commercial port in the Visayas that Nicholas Loney's primary aim in Iloilo was to destroy its textile manufacturing industry in order to substitute imported British cottons, and that his contribution to the sugar industry was merely coincidental. That is how the textile brand Manchester eventually became more popular than the patadyong in the Philippine market. Manchester also almost killed the industry. My first series, which I did in 1988-89, I used the patadyong as symbolic backdrop on the adverse impact of colonialism, the atrocities of war, social injustice, and the persistence of an indigenous belief system. This was part of the Philippine exhibition, Images of the Continuing Struggle at ArtSpace Visual Arts Center in Sydney in 1989. The series was also represented in the second ASEAN Traveling Exhibition in 1981, which toured Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and Brunei. The series also made it to the seminal survey show New Art from Southeast Asia 1992, held at the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum and Hiroshima City Museum Contemporary Art, among other museums, curated by Hideki Nakamura and Arata Tani. Two works also concurrent to the exhibition New Art from Southeast Asia in 1992, I was able to do an on-site installation during the second Nagori open-air art exhibition in Nagori, Japan. This diptych is entitled Homage to the Gods of Nature. Two works are now in the permanent collection of Fukuoka, and one work is in the Ateneo Art Gallery permanent collection. The second series, which was started in 1989, was featured in my solo exhibition, Oracion or Incantation, at Hiraya Gallery in 1994. I started my art practice in the 1980s, a very turbulent period in the country's political history in Bacolod City, the capital of Negros Occidental. The Visayan island of Negros is just an hour away by fast boat from the island of Panay. The economy of Negros has always been largely dependent on sugarcane cultivation. A semi-feudal system still exists here, where social inequalities between the few land-owning families and the vast population of sugar workers and peasants have been the root of the class war being waged by the National Democratic Front against the ruling elite. The protracted revolution started during the Marcos regime in the 1960s, and this series is informed by this historical and political context. This series was also included in the exhibition Memories of Overdevelopment, Philippine Diaspora in Contemporary Art at the University of California Irvine Art Gallery in the US, and Plug-in Contemporary Art Space in Winnipeg, Canada, both in 1997. Two works from this series, The Wedding in Negros and The Matriarch from Negros, were represented in the exhibition Between Declarations and Dreams, Art of Southeast Asia since the 19th Century, the inaugural exhibition of the National Gallery, Singapore in 2015. Two works have remained in the collection of the National Gallery, Singapore. Sorry. This new series of textile work was produced for Unfolding Fabric of Our Life, the inaugural exhibition of CHAT, or Center for Heritage Art and Textile, in 2019 in Hong Kong. Some of the works were previewed at the Artissima Contemporary Art Fair in Turin, Italy in 2018, courtesy of Silver Lens Galleries. The series, entitled Incantations in the Land of Virgins, Monsters, Sorcerers, and Angry Gods, aims to honor the Panay Bukidnon, the indigenous people of my home province in the Visayas island of Panay. The Panay Bukidnon has for centuries resisted various forms of foreign aggression by retreating to the interior or more remote areas of the island. Due mainly to the rugged terrains and inaccessibility of the central Panay mountain range, Spanish and American colonizers were discouraged from coming into contact with the highlanders. It is a shame that where foreign aggressors had failed, the government's own military has succeeded not in colonizing the mountain people, but in killing without due process tribal leaders suspected of sympathizing with the underground revolutionary movement. Last December 30, 2020, simultaneous police operations on the indigenous communities in the province of Capiz and Iloilo left 9 dead who allegedly resisted arrest, while 17 others were arrested and are still in detention until today. The indigenous leaders who were killed were said to have been actively protesting the construction of the government's Halaur River Dam project. The river flows along their ancestral lands, and it is the same old story all over again. 40 years ago, the indigenous peoples from the Cordillera region in the northern Philippines resisted the construction of the Chico River Dam project at the height of Marcos martial law years. This opposition resulted in the killing of Makliing Dulag in 1980, the tribal leader in the Cordillera region. This series is composed of 12 works in 2 editions. The early edition of 6 Patadyong are pre-owned, collected from way back in the late 1980s from old women from a village in Iloilo. In a sense, these old Patadyong, whose colors had faded over the years, carry personal histories of those women who had worn them in the best and in the worst of times during their lifetime. The recent edition of 6 Patadyongs were new at the time they were acquired from a few remaining handloom weavers in 2017, These surviving looms are a reminder that Iloilo used to be a center of the weaving industry when Visayans wove textiles from abaca, pineapple, cotton, and silk. These 6 works are now hanging at the exhibition A Life Beyond Boundaries, curated by Loredana Pacini, a prolific Southeast Asian contemporary art and scholar. Despite my being a Visayan, I don't consider myself a Visayan artist, but simply an artist coming from the region. I use this indigenous textile in my work not to reflect my own identity, but to reflect the Panay Bukidnon's history and struggles, and to reflect the aspiration of all peoples to have a life beyond the boundaries of poverty, oppression, inequality, and social justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pee-wee, for your presentation. And for some reason, as you know, well, we worked together previously, but this Patadion series has always been very attractive for me. And I actually saw it at Chat in Hong Kong, and it was love at first sight. I felt such a strong connection with that work and with the history and the traditions behind the work. And like many of your works, I think it's quite clear how you connect faith and sorcery and traditions. On the one hand, to maintain cultural heritage, and on the other, to dispel or perhaps to resist hegemonic suppression and violence. So thank you very much, Pee-wee, for this presentation, and thank you all for our 4 speakers for your fantastic presentation. I'm very humbled today to be part of this. And I would like to have a few questions open to the floor for questions. I think we have still about 15 minutes or 20. So it would be wonderful to hear from all of you that are following this discussion. Perhaps I'll just start this conversation with a question that stems really from all your presentations and the works. I feel they have many common points that of looking back at traditions, at cultural heritage, and production of knowledge in terms of language or forms of conscript and language or text. But one other component that is that comes to me that is quite visible is your work being activist in one way or the other. And I would like to include also Ajahn Chanvit in the sense. Ajahn Chanvit was, as I mentioned, he initiated the campaign to rename Thailand Siam, to give justice to all cultural ethnicities. So his approach as a scholar and the approach of all of you, Pee-wee, quite evident in your involvement with the community, as well as body in re-examining the Bandung conference over and over in your works, in a way, almost to me, to distill really the legacy and the impact that that conference had on the fate of Southeast Asia. And also marking your way of approaching your practice as a gestural mark making in different ways, including your graffiti, urban graffiti practice. So my question for you all, since this component is quite strong in your works, has your activist practice in your works facilitated or complicated your own connection to your own country? In other words, that is, has it helped defining your own national identity, or has it become a burden or perhaps highlighted a conflict with it? Any of you can answer, or maybe all of you. Bodhi, would you like to go first, since you were the first, and then we go in order?
I think this is a very challenging question, especially for me, Loredana, because it's very obvious that the notion of who exactly is this group of people whom I can claim to represent is very problematic for me. I come from the perspective of somebody from a diasporic community who feels very unrooted, who doesn't have a sort of a sort of a core or a center of which I can build my sense of national identity, or even if I want to talk about kind of a social belonging. And these are issues that I talk about a lot in my art practice. Hence, I do not quite know how to answer your question with regards to this activist gesture. But I often instead think about what possible contribution can my kind of work possibly offer to the discourse of these issues around national identity and so forth. And I think the best that I can come up with at this moment is how I think that to be able to speak from the boundaries or the intersections of several identities and cultures, that it allowed me to suggest possible combinations or possible interactions between these cultures and histories and narratives through my art. And I think it is my hope that such an artistic practice or gesture would help in, I guess, the imagining of a sort of identity that lies beyond the boundaries of individual nationalities, and which I personally feel to be very important in our times, in the very uncertain geopolitical situation, cultural wars, as we all know by now. I think what I would like to hopefully achieve is a kind of a tone that encourages a positive type of dialogue and exchange between differences through creative means or of imagining how they can coexist and interact with one another.
Thank you, Bodhi. I think you also mentioned this at the end of your presentation when you said that there was a message for peace, in a sense, and recollection. So it's a quite positive, I think, approach. And it seems to me that this is a work in progress, and that your work, artworks, in a way facilitate that journey, or pave that journey until you find some sort of reflection in your personal history as a diasporic person. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think at the same time I think I have also sort of accepted that this state of liminality, this being in between, may be something that will stay permanently. It is not something to be resolved. And instead, how can I best use of this position to imagine in my mind, a kind of cultural connective tissue. I like how Mark talked about the kind of a relationship between the body and the land. I think this is something that I can, that resonated very strongly with me, because as a child, I felt very keenly in my body the separation from home, and everything that I saw, I smell, I hear, that I heard in this very foreign place in Singapore had left a very deep impression, and I think this imagination of identities or cultures as being part of a kind of a collective body, and where I think my role or my very small contribution can be in the area of imagining how this collective body can possibly interconnect and interrelate, is something that I find to be particularly meaningful.
Thank you. But again, I think your work translates that, and it requires attention and concentration, but your work reflects what you are saying. And this condition of liminality, of course, is very strong for you as being a diasporic person, but I think it can resonate in a way with also that inspiration from the book, or to me, it does anyway. It resonates to different personal experiences. And as you mentioned, Mark, I think, Mark, your experience also with your family experience, you mentioned your uncle and then your father as a progressive journey into finding that connection with the nation. How is it for you, this connection, and your work? Does it facilitate that process towards identity?
Yeah, thank you for, I'm also processing that question in myself, like making work with a family, because we always thought that family is very small unit. It's not like grand narrative, but when we talk about family, it becomes the basic unit of the society. And I think each part of a member of a family can be connected to a larger context of where we belong, or like there's always saying that each one family member has someone living abroad or working abroad. And this is also, it's kind of like creating a new context of where is really a family, or where a nation is situated. So I'm interested with the idea of, as you mentioned about activism and everything, but the idea of being together is one way. As an being activism or being an activist is to be together, the idea of collectivity and to organize or to get together. Like I'm also interested how connecting with family, and then when you go abroad, like migrant workers who congregate in, like, for example, in the church, and then they sell food and everything. So these small things is connected to the larger context of how do we belong, or how can we connect to each other. And the idea of gathering is important for me, because gathering is not a stable concept. It's, as I mentioned, it's portable, and it will be dismantled after maybe 1 hour of gathering, but they will go to different places and continue their life. But at one point, you will gather again. So I'm interested on this notion of making the idea of togetherness as a form of activism, not like a radical activism, but the idea of, to organize, like maybe singing karaoke in the, like in a place in a foreign land, but you sing Filipino song. So I think this idea of intimate connection. Like especially I found a lot of materials. I say materials that I work with from my family's not really collection, but stuff that accumulated. And the idea also of accumulation is the idea of maybe building an identity. I don't know, but it's also accumulation through objects that connects to the person. So like my father recently passed away, and he collected a lot of stuff that maybe not really important, but it has connection to a bigger context maybe of the society, like the Gina Lollobrigida book. So I didn't know about that, but he has a book. And because he is a fan of Gina Lollobrigida, so I kind of become interested on that. And also the vinyl records. No one is playing that in my family. So maybe this music or collecting is a part of building an identity by my father, but it can connect a bigger picture of a larger narrative of that is not written in the books maybe. So I think like this small gesture of intimate connection is yeah, I'm interested with like working with also graffiti artists, family, so with a group of people. And also I work with Peewee a lot with Green Papaya. So this is another form of like gathering. It's not permanent gathering. I mean, I'm not part of Green Papaya, but we are kind of gathered there because we believe in maybe we share something. So this idea of portable, like it's not permanent, it's unstable, but you gather.
Thank you also, Mark, for this. I think it was very clear what you said and also very interesting. And in a way, it seems to me, and I agree with you, that the family is a small community and is a unit of a bigger community. So from a family to a village to a town to a nation. So maybe one way to think about national identity or identity could be that of reflecting our own self to the community. And that could be the starting point to reflect on these questions of belonging and representation. And in terms of the diasporic, like the Filipino that sing in karaoke in different parts of the world, I think that is also resonant to what, for instance, James Clifford mentioned as a diaspora theorist, of that journey of being diasporic, where the two notions are fundamental. One is the memory of the home and the eventual, and holding it as the eventual place of return. So that tug of war between the memory and the final destination, I think, helps us to create that journey that is important. And of course, as you mentioned, Peewee, Green Papaya, the role of Green Papaya as a small community, and the work that Peewee does, which when I introduced your work, Peewee, and the exhibition, I always say that you have a very activist spirit in supporting and translating the message from the communities. So how do you negotiate that passage of yourself and the community?
Thank you, Mark, for that statement earlier. I'll go back to that because I wanted to react to that earlier, but I would like to answer Loredana's question if I understood it right. The question is how to reconcile art and activism. I mean, to put it simply. So if you study your own history, for example, as a point of departure for a particular work that you want to produce, how can you not help becoming an activist, considering all the persecutions your country went through at the hands of the colonizers? So knowing your history makes you a natural activist. Today, you don't even have to go back to your own history. your own observation of contemporary history, like for example, what's happening in Myanmar and what all the artists in Yangon and the rest of Myanmar are doing to resist the military junta. In the Philippines, we don't have to look far and see what's happening in Myanmar. We only have to look around us and count the dead bodies since 5 years ago when this administration took power. So I feel lucky, and maybe my only privilege in this panel is because I lived through the years of Marcos, the Marcos martial law years. And I never imagined myself to become an activist, but I landed in the island of Negros, and I was planning to start a family there, not knowing what was happening in that island. But when you realize that the island of Negros is quote unquote like a social volcano, where feudalism is still a fundamental problem up to now, you cannot help but think about why this fundamental problem has been going on for how many centuries already. So I think being an artist and being an activist goes hand in hand. So that's my way of answering Loredana's question earlier. And to go back to Mark's observation a while ago, it's true that Mark and I, we've been working together closely. And interestingly, last year and this year, Mark and I were always together in international exhibitions. We were together in chat. That's why I was worried earlier that Mark's slides won't run, because I know his works. I know how important to show his works. So we've been in 3 international exhibitions together, but not only that, in Manila, Lod Nadido and Green Papaya have always been working together and trying to nurture a community and building a community. And again, let's go back to the notion of we build a community, and building a community is a political act. And building a community, and once the community is there, you just don't hang out with Benedict Anderson and drink beer, So you try, in that very small community, you tend to be self-reflexive. You look around you, outside your own communities, and you start to be critical of your own society. And being critical is being political. You don't have to go out into the streets with your right hand raised. And like what Mark was saying also a while ago, that you can sing a karaoke in other countries, singing Filipino songs, and that can be considered raising the identity of the Filipinos out there. So I really, in my own practice, I really don't know how I can separate my being an artist from being an activist.
Thank you, Piwi. I'm very impressed, and I also am completely in agreement with you that when we look at history, we feel that, and in any different ways, you all, Bodhi looks very much at history, and in a very subtle way, he reacts to that, and so is Mark, and you, Piwi, is very clear, the message. As perhaps again quite strong call to the community, but it seems to me that your being an artist and activist is also a way to reflect on your own national identity. I mean, it combines together. You are part of that community, and that community is what you want to discuss and support in different ways. And I think together with all the other artists in the exhibition, I think that conversation goes very well throughout the exhibition. I think you all, even if some of you have not met previously, your works speak in a way the same language, to use the word language. There is one question in the chat box that I'm reading now from Paul. And I will read it allowed. And I think we have really only 5 minutes. We went over time a little bit, but I think this has been very interesting. So the question, regarding the multicultural and migratory nature of today's world in relation to feeling rootless, was there any internal tension in choosing excluding particular aspects of personal experiences when considering the idea of belonging in national context? Has this changed over the course of wider artistic practice or even during this project? I don't know if this question is aimed to the artist or in terms of, if I can address this question as a curator for the project, I don't feel there was any tension in choosing excluding particular aspects of personal experiences, as the question poses. There wasn't any tension in as far as I can speak. I felt that all the work were very much complementing each other. Because they all address this question of belonging in a different way, and we've had a very, sample very clear here today with this, with you guys, with the 3 artists, how they all complement each other, but all their works and all the messages are actually very closely related to identify that belonging, that question of belonging. So in terms of curating the project and researching for this project and conversating with all the artists, there was an incredible amount of learning for me, of which I was very grateful from all the artists. And in the process of making this exhibition, I think things became clearer to me anyway. On what was the focus for the project. Has any of you any additional comments on this question? Odi, Piwi, or Mark? No? Okay, I hope I answered this, addressed this question, and I am also very much aware of the time. So it's past 5. I'm going to close this event. Really thanking everybody to tune in, the speakers, of course. I'm very pleased to have had such a wonderful turnout and engagement from all the speakers. So this, A Life Beyond Boundaries, from the book to the exhibition, was our first online event for the series Artists in Conversation. We departed from the curatorial framework of the exhibition to unpack the legacy and inspiration of Benedict Anderson's book, A Life Beyond Boundaries. And the speakers, the artists, and Ajahn Chanbit have shared ideas and interrogated possibilities and complicated that very challenging question of national identity in relation to, I think, all of your subjective experiences, living and or belonging to Southeast Asia. If Mary, could you please share the poster for next event? Thank you. So I would like to also mention our next event on August 13 at the same time, 3 p.m. GMT +7. I'm very pleased to announce that we will have duo artist Tita Salina and Irawan Hamet, part of the exhibition, performing a lecture performance, Apocalyptic Smile, a rarely seen and recent performance that they have adapted specifically for our online event. And I'm also very much delighted to have as a guest speaker, curator Renan Larouan, who will be the respondent for this event, for this lecture performance. He will be in conversation, with the artist, stimulating us into thinking about who is the nation, the question that we've been trying to address today. So please mark your diaries if you can make it on August 13. Is also a Saturday like today. and I will see you all then. Meanwhile, please stay safe, stay home wherever you are. I think we need to be very cautious. And many, many thanks to you all for this, to the speakers in particular, and to all of you for joining today. Thank you. Sawadee ka.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.